I'm John Heilemann.
And I'm Mark Halperin. With all due respect to our writing team, you kind of missed the ball on this one.
If there was ever a time to use the headline, Biden his time, this is it.
The politics lead, Biden his time.
Biden his time.
Biding his time.
Biden his time.
Joe seems to be Biden his time.
Is he just Biden his time?
Biden his time.
Biden his time.
Is he just Biden his time?
Dear God.
The past 8 years, just Biden his time. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah. On the show tonight, Biden's talk, Trump versus Fox, and the New Hampshire ballot box. But first, Jebs throwing rocks. He's throwing them at the only one worth taking down at this point, DJT. Today, Jeb engaged the front-running Donald at a town hall in Englewood, Colorado.
Mr. Trump believes that you can just round people up, and that it's just an easy thing to do because he's a successful guy and he'll just have successful people do it and it'll all work out. Well, the cost of this will be extraordinary. It will disrupt community life. It doesn't embrace American values that I think should be respected. It's not a conservative plan, and it's not practical. It will cost hundreds of billions of dollars, and it's not going to happen either. It's just not possible to do it. How do you know, he's proposed eliminating remittances. So who's going to decide who's, legally remitting money back to their families in other countries? Are we going to have just go door by door and do this? You can't build a wall and solve this. I mean, if you've been to the border, first of all, there is no. I mean, you'd put American citizens on the unless you build it in the middle of the Rio Grande River, which I don't think is feasible. The cost of it is extraordinary. The terrain makes it impossible. It's a great soundbite, but it's not defensible in terms of a practical policy.
All right, so another day of data about Jeb Bush and whether this is an effective way for him to advance his candidacy by taking on Trump. What do you think?
Well, I'm going to get to my caveats in a moment, but let me just say, on paper, I said this yesterday on the show, the notion of making this a mano-a-mano fight with Donald Trump, being feisty, being conservative, calling himself conservative and Trump liberal, trying to peel away some supporters from Marco Rubio and John Kasich who don't like the fact that those guys are being quiet about Trump. All of that on paper makes a lot of sense. My caveat I will reserve until after you speak.
Look, the Bush campaign is not going to pick every fight with Trump. They took a pass on fighting over Barbara Bush, for instance. Yes. But they are going to look to do this to try to help define Jeb Bush. My caveats are, Jeb Bush says there are two things he wants to do in running for the nomination. One, be joyful. That did not look like a joyful man. He's got to learn how to take on Trump and be joyful by his own standards. And the other is, he said he's not going to say things that will hurt chance of winning the general election. And while he didn't necessarily there, obviously on anchor babies and some other issues, he has.
Well, yes, and again, to your first point, Howard Stern, I believe, on the radio, possibly yesterday or today, I can't remember when I heard it, said that he thinks that Jeb Bush speaks Spanish better than he speaks English. And I think there's something to that. He's not only does he not look joyful, he's also just sort of yammering and stammering, and he's not driving even the message he wants to drive against Trump. So on paper it works. The performance is really sorely lacking so far.
Today, again, not in the context of taking on Trump, he talked about Planned Parenthood, seemed to want to get rid of Planned Parenthood. He's making errors in the context of going after Trump. That's a potential problem.
All right. Trump Tower ain't just a skyscraper in Midtown Manhattan. And by the way, we will be there tomorrow to interview the Donald live on this program, so tune into that. No, Trump Towers is also a description of the Donald's relationship to the Republican field. He is so far above the others that they are barely able to be heard. But if you cup your ear, you can discern the whimperings of candidates saying Trumpian things. Like this from Scott Walker in Derby, New Hampshire on Friday, when all of the attention was on Trump in Mobile, Alabama.
If you're fighting a war, you've got to identify who the enemy is loud and clear. We've said it repeatedly. It's radical Islamic terrorism. It is a war against not only America and Israel. It's a war against Christians. It's a war against Jews. It's a war against even the handful of reasonable and moderate followers of Islam who don't share the radical beliefs that these radical Islamic terrorists have.
Just a handful.
Just a handful of moderate Muslims. For FYI, we asked the Walker campaign about what Scott Walker said there, and they replied that Walker knows full well that the majority of Muslims want to live in peace. So, Mark, having said that, this is not the only candidate who's said a few Trumpian kind of things that have kind of just been blown away. No one's paid attention. Are those things eventually going to come back to haunt those candidates, maybe? Or are they just going to get away scot-free?
I mean, I don't think Scott Walker believes it's only a handful. He just kind of misspoke. But I think in the short term, they'll get away with it because Trump on that day and many other days blots stuff out. I think if you're going to beat Trump, if you're going to be a finalist, you're going to have to improve your performance. And I think one of the negative effects is these guys a lot of days aren't getting coverage. They're not going to get better if they're not covered. Yeah,
it's a funny thing, right? It would be bad for them in some sense if these things got a lot of attention, they got hammered. On the other hand, especially someone like Scott Walker, who has made a lot of small kind of being too loose with his with his language, it would be better for him to get hammered in some ways because he might learn from that.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Trump has a big rally in Iowa today, and Jeb Bush said this thing I referred to earlier about Planned Parenthood, which we'll see how much attention he gets. But let's listen to what Jeb Bush said earlier today about Planned Parenthood.
Okay.
I, for one, don't think they should get that Planned Parenthood ought to get a penny, though. And that's the difference, because they're not actually doing women's health issues. They're involved in something way different than that.
Now, the Democrats are jumping all over that, and that may come back to haunt him. But today, today, if Jeb Bush were the front runner, which if it weren't for Trump, he probably would be, saying Planned Parenthood shouldn't get any money, and they don't do
any health care when
he'd be hammered. He's going to get off a little bit easier.
Right.
But
Hillary Clinton tweeted about it today. But boy, it seems like he made an error the last time. I thought when he stepped in it on the question of I don't want to provide all that money for women's health. Today he tried to clarify that and then said this thing on Planned Parenthood. Apparently that's a fight they want. I don't know if that's a mistake or if that's actually they're trying to actually make this something they want to hug that rail.
I think the last one was misspeaking. Today he seemed pretty purposeful.
Yes.
And again, I'll say if Jeb Bush makes those kind of errors, if he ever gets to be the front runner again, it's going to be problematic.
97% of what Planned Parenthood does.
All right. There are a lot of duels happening right now in the context of the presidential campaign. There's, as we've said, Jeb versus Trump, Biden v. Hillary, which we'll talk about in a bit. But there's another one that's being a little bit overlooked. That's Walker versus Rubio. Marco Rubio, the senator from Florida, Scott Walker, the governor of Wisconsin, have been matched up a little bit. On August 14th, Walker announced that he was going to give a health care policy speech in Minnesota, a major address about Obamacare. A couple of days later, on the eve of that address, Marco Rubio wrote an op-ed in Politico that basically recycled a previously announced plan about dealing with Obamacare. Coincidence? Maybe. But flash forward to yesterday. The Walker campaign announced for planning purposes that he was going to give a foreign policy speech in Charleston, South Carolina this Friday. Today, guess what Rubio did? Yes, he announced that he's also going to give a foreign policy speech in Charleston, South Carolina on the same day, about an hour earlier, just 8 miles away. Rubio also said that his speech was going to focus on China, something Walker's been talking about for days. We tried to get the Rubio campaign to respond to us and say whether this is, in fact, a coincidence. What do you think?
Well, I mean, once maybe a coincidence. Twice, starting to look like a pattern. These two guys have been, I think, hurt as badly as anybody by Donald Trump's rise. These were guys who could have been in the top tier with Jeb Bush if not for Donald Trump. They are now clearly not in the top tier. There's no one can argue that they're top tier candidates right now. Given their poll standing, they are scrapping around trying to see if one of them can take the other one out. I think they don't think there's room for both of them.
They're competing to be the new generation guy. They're competing. They're competing to be the anti-Bush in terms of symbolism, and they're also competing for donors right now. They're both not raising as much as they'd like. No one is, and I think the Walker campaign would have a claim to say that the Rubio folks are in fact trying to bracket and shadow Walker to keep him from getting any advantage. Well, because they don't want him to break through.
And I think it's also because the Rubio people are everybody's kind of scrapping around for what scraps are left on the floor, but also there's a sign that Walker is weak. Rubio never has gotten that much altitude. Walker was flying pretty high there for a moment and has been on a real downslope. I think the Rubio people see an opportunity to pounce.
Maybe, but they're the ones showing weakness by shadowing Walker rather than vice versa.
That depends on how it gets covered.
Assuming that's what they're doing. Let us know, Rubio campaign.
Yes, please do. We have been biding our time long enough. So let's get to the beat. Today, Joe Biden attended the funeral of former Congressman Louis Stokes in Cleveland. And also today, amid speculation that Biden might run for president, news broke that he plans to lobby DNC members on the Iran nuclear deal tomorrow. The speculation, of course, is the story. It ramps up every day, more intense, more intense, more intense, that the Biden president is leaning into it, that Barack Obama has given his blessing, et cetera, et cetera. But, Mark, I ask you, we've been grappling with this while you've been away. We'll grapple with it now today. What is going on right now in Biden world?
The political press sound and fury over the White House and the Clintons and all this other stuff. This is a personal decision. On the one side, the personal argument for running is that Beau Biden told his father he wanted him to run. Personally, Joe Biden has a chance to be elected president after running twice before and doesn't want to give up that dream, because if he gives it up in the next month, it's over. On the other side, personally, there's a lot of stress on the family because of Beau Biden's death. Jill Biden, several people have told me, is not in a mood to go screaming down the presidential campaign trail. And I think that in the end, the personal will decide it. And I still think it's going to be very hard for the family to decide this is what they want to put themselves through.
I think you're 100% right on the personal thing. The interesting piece, having talked to a lot of people around the vice president off and on for the last week or so, is that they are now very confident that they can raise the money, that they can build a campaign, that Hillary, that all the stuff that the press focus on. Can they get a campaign together? Can they raise the money?
What states would he campaign in?
What states is Clinton weak enough to challenge him? All of that stuff, they think there's an appetite for the vice president. They think there's a room, there's space for him in the race. The question again comes down to Biden's heart, and I actually think it's pulling in two different directions. Also, the way that Biden recovered when his wife and child were killed back in 1972, the way he recovered was throwing himself into work. And there's part of him that thinks that a campaign would be part of recovery. There's another part of him that thinks if he can't do this joyously, he shouldn't do it at all, and he's not sure he can find the joy in his heart.
I don't know which way it's going to go, but I think his grandkids and his wife will play a big part in how he
Huge
decides.
part.
All right, coming up, the pride in New Hampshire, John Sununu, former senator and Kasich supporter, joins us from the Granite State after this.
Our guest tonight is associated with two of the most beloved institutions in America, Red Sox Nation and the United States Senate. Former Senator John Sununu of New Hampshire, thanks for joining us from Manchester. Senator,
that was a great intro.
I almost added John Kasich as a third. You are associated with John Kasich, and we have a bunch of questions to ask you today. I'll start with this one. We've watched over the course of the last week Jeb Bush trying to really take the hammer to Donald Trump. John Kasich, not as of yet taking the hammer to Donald Trump. Explain why one establishment kind of candidate, a mainstream conservative like Jeb Bush, sees it as it is being in his interest to attack Trump, where your guy does not.
Look, I can't speak for Jeb Bush. I think it's the wrong thing to do this early in the stage to lash out and start going after your fellow candidates. You saw on the debate Chris Christie and Rand Paul going at it. I don't think anyone thought they came out the better for that exchange. It is early. This early in the race, you have to remember you're still introducing yourself. Whether you're Jeb Bush or Marco Rubio or John Kasich, you need to be introducing yourself to the voters here in New Hampshire and across the country. You need to do it every day, every week, for the next couple of months. And anytime you're not introducing yourself, I think you risk losing ground. Voters don't know. In the case of John Kasich, yes, he's governor of Ohio, but he balanced the budget there. He cut taxes. He created 350,000 jobs. He privatized prison, reformed entitlements. These are important issues for him to get across to voters, make sure they understand where he comes from, how he solves problems.
Senator,
and it's just not smart to be lashing out at every candidate out there.
If you were to compare John Kasich to any previous United States president, who would it be?
Look, every Republican would throw out Ronald Reagan, but I think there are some parallels there. It's wrong to say John Kasich is Ronald Reagan, but he's a governor, chief executive experience. He's a problem solver. He's, of course, passionate about the country, but he has that joyful vision for what America can and should be. So it's come across in his town hall meetings, and I think it resonates.
So, Reagan, if you were to compare Donald Trump to any previous American president, who would it be?
Oh, come on. None. Come on. There's never been There's never been a nominee like Donald Trump. You know that. I don't think you can make any comparison.
In what ways?
No political experience. Someone that has supported, supported legalizing 10 or 20 million illegal immigrants. Now he's changed his position. He's changed his position on life. I mean, he's obviously not of the political experience.
We've had presidents who's changed positions.
Oh, well, I think those are some pretty dramatic changes. Single-payer health care, now he's against Obamacare. Come on, you know this. You know that there are a lot of things that are very different and unique about him, and I think to try to compare him to a previous president would be a little silly.
Senator, since all we really ever want to talk about on the show now is Donald Trump, I'll ask you one last Trump question. He is so far, just as John Kasich has not really attacked Donald Trump, so far Donald Trump has more or less laid off John Kasich, and there may be a relation, there may be a correlation or a causation there. But if Donald Trump were to start attacking your guy, as he has others, how do you think John Kasich would handle that?
I have no idea. I mean, look, that's a really a kind of a silly hypothetical. This is a long campaign. We've got 162 days to the New Hampshire primary. As I just said, the smart thing for any candidate, frankly, even if you are being attacked, is to focus on your message, your game, your vision for the country. Introduce yourself to the voters. John Kasich has done that, I think, very effectively over the past 6 or 8 weeks. But it's just the start of a process. People didn't think it'd be on the debate stage in Cleveland. We made it. He's obviously made some headway here in the polls in New Hampshire. But I'm the first one to tell him that we've got a long way to go. Polls are transient. And you've got to focus on your record, your experience, and your game.
Senator, John Kasich is doing well in the polls in your state. One of your fellow Kasich supporters predicted to me several weeks ago that at some point before Labor Day, John Kasich would pass Jeb Bush in the polls, and at least in some that appears to be true. Do you think he should focus mostly on New Hampshire, or would you like to see him make a big effort, an equally big effort in Iowa and South Carolina?
Well, I think he will continue to visit Iowa, South Carolina, New Hampshire, Michigan, and really most of the key, the 4 or 5
but in equal measure?
Of the earliest states. You never do anything in equal measure, I don't think. You know, you have to pick and choose those areas where you have the strongest organization. But I think he'll do very well, of course, in New Hampshire. I think he'll do very well in South Carolina, very well in Michigan. Iowa's a caucus format. Again, you know that. It hasn't been a good predictor necessarily of future success. You've got a very spread out field, and it's a challenging enviurement. But John Kasich's still going to go and compete. And we hope to do well in Iowa.
Senator, you called us silly twice, which can't help but remind us of your father, who often calls us silly and recently had surgery. So we're glad he went through that successfully, and please send him our best. Former governor.
He's doing fine. He should be home next week. And the good news is it's irrefutable evidence he does have a heart. So the Sununus are excited and proud about that.
Who knew? Who knew? It was like the day that hell froze over. All right, John Sununu, thank you. When we come back, the most enticing feud in politics, Donald Trump versus Fox News, after this.
And now, Donald Trump versus Megyn Kelly. Let's walk through the brief history of just the last 20 hours. Kelly came back from vacation, did her Fox show, got her usual big crowd audience of hundreds of thousands, apparently including Mr. Trump, who tweeted and retweeted a veritable sharknado of criticism, all aimed at Kelly. Things like, quote, "I like the Kelly file much better without Megyn Kelly." That got 2,400 retweets. Trump also quoted some guy who called Kelly a bimbo. That got 850 retweets. Today, the Fox News team en masse went on Twitter and defended Kelly. And the head of Fox News, Roger Ailes, said in a statement that although Trump rarely apologizes, in this case he should, Trump shot back by saying Kelly is not a, quote, quality journalist, and he pointed out that he won the prestigious Corn Kernel poll at the Iowa State Fair by a landslide. All right, it's generally thought that Trump won the first go-round with Fox. Is he on track to beat them again?
Well, look, what was very striking today was the way in which not just Roger Ailes fired back, but the way in which a lot of people on Fox News, on Twitter, using very similar language. So you had, Kirsten Powers, Dana Perino, Brian Kilmeade, Brett Baer, a lot of folks all kind of saying this must stop to Trump, which you didn't have before. It feels like there was a directive that went out. And if you get the collectivity of corporate Fox News and on-air Fox News, if they are all being marshaled now to rise
another
up
coincidence,
against
like
Trump,
the Rubio thing,
right? That is more of a problem. I mean, that could be in the end. Donald Trump, Fox, Republican voters watch Fox. If there's some kind of retribution, if there's some kind of freeze out happening, if there's some way in which the company somehow really lines up against Trump, it's a problem for Trump.
Right, if that happened. But here's the thing. If Donald Trump called Sean Hannity or Megyn Kelly or anyone else, they'd put him on the air. In the law of supply and demand, which is something both Roger Ailes and Donald Trump understand, until they're willing to say, you're saying something so inappropriate, we're not putting you on the air, Trump wins. Yeah.
Well, I see that. Well, look, he wins in the short term. It cannot be good, like in the wash, Donald Trump becoming the nominee, Donald Trump becoming the president of the United States. Beating up on a highly qualified, highly intelligent, highly successful woman cannot be the way to win. It just cannot be.
It may not.
Bimbo, calling a woman like Megyn Kelly a bimbo repeatedly in public, picking that fight over and over, cannot be a way to win the presidency. Just not.
Well, that kind of stuff hasn't hurt him. He said a lot.
So far.
He said a lot worse. So far. But I think in Trump's corner here is people see him as strong. And what is the most counterintuitive thing, which is crazy strong in a way, for a Republican to stand up to Fox News and still get to be on their air?
There got to be other ways, though, for him to stand up to Fox News than by doing it this way. I think this is a thing that has a limited shelf life. This kind of attack.
What if he hadn't retweeted the bimbo and he just had criticized her?
But would have been better.
Difference?
Would have been better. Would have been better.
Yeah.
Bimbo's like, it's just, I think that's the thing that they're reacting to more than anything. It's one thing to say, I don't like Megyn Kelly, she's not good on the show.
Here's the other thing. Here's the other thing where Trump is showing strength. You look at last cycle and even this cycle, other Republicans were worried about not catering to Fox. Right. If they didn't give every first interview to Fox, only go on Fox, they'd be punished by Fox. Trump goes on CNN, MSNBC.
He's the only
coming on with us tomorrow. He does whatever he wants
because he's bigger. He's bigger than Fox.
Has to put him on.
He's bigger than Fox.
And
he's
Mitt Romney was not bigger than Fox.
No Republican in the last cycle was bigger than Fox, and no other Republican is bigger than Fox in this cycle. He's the only one who is bigger than Fox as a force right now, and that is a powerful place to be, no doubt.
Yeah. So I think he's on track to beat him. I mean, they may think that pushing back hard. I think they're loyal to Megyn Kelly, and understandably so. She's their colleague, but their loyalty to her, let's see how far it extends. Because if he said that about a colleague of yours, would you put him on your show?
Let me offer you a cliche, though. He may very well win the battle, but he was on his way to losing the war.
We'll see. He's still fighting Fox pretty tough. All right. As we've said, Donald Trump will join us tomorrow. We'll be doing this program live from Trump Tower. More details on the big interview
Trump
tomorrow.
Tower? Really?
After the break.
Oh, my God. We are live 24/7 on BloombergPolitics.com, but we're on the tube, the television, twice a day at 5 and at 8.
Tomorrow, we'll be at Trump Tower live with the Donald Trump interview on this program. Don't miss that. Until then, for all you viewers in TV land and those listening on the radio, we say to you with a deep bow that you can't see on radio, sayonara.